Hello, welcome to my weekly cybersecurity roundup. My name is Clinton Walker, and this week I'll be covering two breaches that occurred in the last 7 days. I'll be covering the breach itself, the impact, and also share some countermeasures. Now, to start off with, I'll start with a company by the name of Odido, which is a Dutch telecoms company, and they've disclosed that they have lost, or an attacker stole 6 million records, and that includes name, addresses, telephone numbers, date of birth, bank details, the lot. And what does that really mean in terms of impact? Well, it's a high risk identity theft scenario because it has all the ingredients to commit identity theft. Opens up them to regulatory exposure, and basically they had a heavy dependency on a particular third party that suffered that breach that piggyback onto their network, and an attacker were able to steal 6 million records. Now, what are some of the countermeasures that could be put in place for this one to prevent this particular breach or to mitigate the impact of that breach? Well, first of all, companies in general, not just this one, they basically should treat suppliers as high risk data custodian. And that will come from the classification of those suppliers, the type of data that they're holding and processing, the type of access they have into your infrastructure. So what can they do? Well, maintain an up-to-date data flow mapping of all their vendors, the type of data that those vendors actually have access to, process, store, or do in terms of are used in terms of carrying out the service to support the business. And that will give them some kind of a risk rating. And most third-party TPRM, third-party risk management platform, have certain types of tiering as well as to how to profile those type of vendors. And certainly that's what we offer as a service. But basically also enforce data minimization, right? If a vendor doesn't need the volume of data that they are asking for to carry out their task, don't restrict that, because GDPR also said don't process or use data or collect data more than what's necessary to carry out that task, right? So again, implement encryption, end-to-end encryption, also enforce a breach notification SLA. And this particular one is really ripe for this scenario because, one, as a telecoms company, they are supposed to they're supposed to be complying what's called the TSA, the Telecommunication Security Act, and other EU regulations that surrounds telecommunication. And that also have a requirement in that act to make sure that there's a breach notification period that's followed, whether that be 24 hours, 72 hours, whichever applies depending on the level of dependency of that particular supplier. Regularly validate and update risk profiles, so that could be a continuous monitoring of suppliers and vendors to make sure that, one, their risk profile is at the level that you agreed or whatever your risk appetite is, and make sure that they're compliant with GDPR, do regular scans or attack surface monitoring. But those high level vendors and suppliers need to be tightly managed and have continuous oversight of them. Now, the other risk or breach that I wanted to talk about was another one, which is now in the fintech space, right? And this is called Figure Technology Solutions. And it was said that a breach occurred via ShinyHunters, which actually use voice or vishing, use a vishing attack style to trick a user over the phone to get MFA and SSO secure sign-on for the devices, and access to their environment. And I laugh because this is a very simple thing that can happen. But in this day and age, people tend to do this, and attackers tend to try all sorts of different methods. Imagine someone ringing up over the phone and ask you to disclose multi-factor authentication details, SSO details. That should start ringing alarms already. But again, it depends on the level of validation and verification that that person would have gone through over the phone. So this is very prominent AI is now really being used sometimes in the back end to really amplify that even more and more. So the impact was that they've lost a lot of personal data. It was 967,000 worth of customer data that was breached. That includes their, of course, their credentials, address, telephone number, date of birth, again, bank details, and other types of data that was exfiltrated, which was also being sold on the dark web. Now, as a financial entity, again, there are different regulations and industry best practices that are applicable here. Now, I touched on DORA before, and DORA is also another act that actually covers the regulated sector, which includes the financial sector, right? Digital Operations Resilience Act, and that also provides a lot of guidelines around third-party risk management, incident management, etc., reporting and breach notifications, especially for those in the financial sector. So what are the countermeasures for this particular one that I'm suggesting is that, one, make sure that you harden the identity and human layer as it relates to SSO, multi-factor authentication, and anti-phishing and anti-vishing activities. So what can you do? Enforce phishing resistant MFA and also use what's called a FIDO2, FIDO2, passkeys, and use those where possible. For admin and high risk account, make sure that you use those techniques, passkeys, and again, harden your MFA and SSO capabilities. Run scenario, which is very, very important. It's very difficult in certain situations, really, as it relates to vishing attack, because it's harder to deal with than actually a phishing attack via email. But run scenario testing and run it again. Make sure that you get the users to actually go through the mail of identifying it and validating it and verifying it, right? Implement conditional access as well. So it depends on the person's device, the location and where they are, and enforce strict admin separation of roles and responsibilities as well. But for typical vishing attack, the only way that you can protect really well against this is through continuous training, continuous practice, and do your very best to verify and verify again. Now, in general, those are the things that I would suggest for this particular breach. Now, as it relates to how Pragmatyq can help in some aspect of this in terms of similar breaches and similar scenarios where third parties are involved, well, we've got a third-party risk management platform that manages vendor and vendor security posture. So from start to finish, we can onboard vendor, do due diligence on those vendors, and do continuous monitoring of their risk profile on a continuous basis, not just a one-off basis annually or quarterly. We have what's called continuous controls monitoring and attack surface monitoring, and also the due diligence that we do to make sure that they are up to industry standard with their security controls. So if you need to know more or learn more about our platform, please feel free to reach out, and I hope you enjoy and find that very informative. Now, any comments, feedback, I'm all ears. So that's it for now. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week with the next weekly roundup. Thank you.